Hi friends, welcome back. I'm Christy. Ah! Sorry about that. I was trying to give it a slight adjustment and I ended up making a big misadjustment. Oh well. So welcome back. I'm Christina, the manager at the Pacific Beach Library. Thank you for joining me for day 13. There you go. Oh gosh, what's the word for fear of 13? Is it like triskaidekaphobia or something like that? But here you go. I think that is why I had bad luck today, clearly. So happy reading with me. This is day 13 of our read along together of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I am going to start with a very special tea. The tea I'm drinking is the Girls in the Garden tea. It's one of the teas that I included in the tea care package that I sent out to the folks who'd RSVP'd to attend the Count of Monte Cristo tea party this Friday. Just so you know, the Girls in the Garden tea, it says it is a rooibos aroma tea with ingredients of rooibos, charming wine-inspired infusion of berries, beetroot, celery, lavender blossoms, and rose petals. Ooh. So I'm gonna go ahead and give this one a try. Oh, let me finish my water, sorry. Sorry about that. Oh, hello, good to see you. So yeah, I'm trying out my Girls in the Garden tea. If you have not RSVP'd for the event, is going for sure, you can still RSVP as going. I just won't have time to deliver the tea or have the tea sent to your nearest pickup location. But if you want to come pick it up from PB, you still could. Or if you just want to enjoy the tea party and socialize without this particular tea, that is also quite wonderful. We would love to get to see you and chat with you. So, oh, let's try this tea. I can smell the roses. What else is in there? It says beetroot and celery. I'm not sure if I'm getting that. I would not have picked out beetroot and celery as among the ingredients, nor lavender, but it is a good blend. It has a really nice scent to it. I'm having a hard time breaking apart the different scents, but it is good. All right, so that's our Girls in the Garden tea, which when I went to Point Loma Teas and said, what is your most French type of tea? This was the one that she said I should get, the Girls in the Garden. So let's talk a little bit about what we read yesterday, and then we'll go ahead and move into today's reading. Yesterday we read two chapters, chapters 22 and 23, and in those chapters, I don't know why I get so amused at the idea of how these folks do everything weird. Oh, I put my bookmarks in the wrong spot. Let me go back and find it. Here we go. So in the prior day's reading, we had just gotten to the point where Nellie Dean had ended the correspondence, the somewhat romantic correspondence between Cathy / Catherine, the younger Linton, and also Linton Heathcliff, the son of Heathcliff and her aunt Isabella. And so Nellie had put an end to it. Then in chapter 22, it started out with basically saying Mr. Linton and his daughter were out in the fields, and Mr. Linton stayed out too long and he got a really bad cold and he was quite ill, and that Cathy, you know, excuse me, was really a wonderful nursemaid. She was taking care of her father. She was getting very little rest, and she was just, you know, just trying to take care of her father and nurse him back to health. And she repented of ever having hurt her father's feelings and caused him any distress, even by that correspondence with young Linton Heathcliff. And so, you know, like lots of passages about Nellie talking about Cathy just weeping, like trying to hide her tears, but unable to cheer up after the sorrow of being afraid, like what will happen when her, oh, sorry. I just saw a note. Somebody was asking about Point Loma Tea's website, saying they're only doing online ordering. Are they open? They were open when I went the weekend of Mother's Day. I went there on Saturday the 8th, and they were open then. I think they're open, but give them a call first before you go out there, just to be sure, because you don't want to waste a trip. But yeah, they seemed quite bustling when I was there. Sorry, back to story. Tea is very important. I had to answer that right away. Let's see. So Cathy is quite distressed about the idea of her father and Nellie leaving her someday, and she's afraid of being alone. So that could be another thing of, but she's also said too, she doesn't want to distress her father by pursuing that romance with Linton Heathcliff. So it's not like a thing of she's going to immediately cling on to him because she's afraid of being alone. So there's still something going on. We don't know how the two of them are going to end up together. Although we do know at the beginning of the story when Lockwood meets her, she is Mrs. Heathcliff, the widow of Heathcliff's son. So we know some of what's going to happen, but not how and why. So what ends up happening is, as she and Nellie, as Cathy and Nellie are walking out one day, they get separated. It's just a little thing. And as Nellie is trying to unlock a door so that Cathy can come back, Heathcliff rides by. And he basically berates young Cathy and says, "You're killing my son." I mean, he's always been in frail health, but he is dying now. And a good part of that is because he's distressed about missing you and about wondering what happened to cause your sudden break in your correspondence. I mean, he was loving you, and you seemed to love him. Were you just teasing him? Like, what was this a game to you? Because he's suffering. He's truly suffering. And she's just utterly distressed to hear this, both because she liked him as a person and because he's her cousin. And, and she's just worried. And Heathcliff says directly to Nellie, seeming quite truthful, "Linton is dying. Grief and disappointment are hastening his death." And he says, basically, "If you don't believe me, you walk over and see it for yourself." And Nellie's like, "No, we're not gonna have anything to do with you." But the next day, Nellie bows to Cathy's wishes, and the two of them go back to Wuthering Heights together to check on the state of Linton. And when they get there, they find Linton in what would sort of be like the parlor. He's in the other room, and he does look very ill and weak, and he's rather complaining. He's quite complaining. He is trying to find the right word for it. If you have the right word for it, please go ahead and post it. But he is he's quite particular. He is very whiny. There is a word for it that I can't quite think of it. Persnickety, perhaps? Crotchety, but he's fretful, and he is he's just quite unhappy. And in fact, he and Cathy end up having a disagreement. She says that the problem is that Mr. Heathcliff had been terrible to her family, and that's why she cannot go. She's been forbidden by her father. And Linton says, "Well, my father scorns yours because he didn't want my father to marry my mother, her aunt Isabella, because, it's like," and so the two of them are both feeling like, oh, their father has been slighted by the other, and they're arguing with each other. And then she sort of gives his chair a little push in the course of this argument, and it so distresses Linton that he cries out in pain. He spends the next long while just saying how basically she's abused him. And she finally says, "I'm so sorry I hurt you. I didn't realize essentially that you were so weak." But she actually does feel really bad about it. High maintenance, that's a good way to put it too. Yeah, Linton is super high maintenance. I'm trying to think, if it was my mom, she probably would have just called him a brat too. But he is also manipulative. I mean, he is not only, he's genuinely hurt. He's physically frail and weak, but he also, as he sees her distress, Nellie notices that he sort of looks over, and when she seems to be more distressed, he ramps up the crying and his wails because he wants her to feel bad. He wants to punish her for having hurt him. So again, he has both. He finds his strength in being vindictive, and he uses his weakness as a tool to hurt others. So it's, again, Linton, so different from his father, yet still having this vengeful manipulativeness. It's interesting to see. So Cathy does stay for a while. Heathcliff, by the way, had said he was going out of town for a week, and he encouraged Cathy to come visit often. And Nellie says, "Oh no, we're not coming back here." But Cathy says something to Linton that makes him smile. And so the implication is that Cathy's going to try to maintain some relationship with him again. And so where the chapter ends is that as a result of having been out so long in the cold, tramping across the moors and then hanging out at Wuthering Heights, Nellie has herself also gotten sick. And so she says that during the day, Miss Catherine was like an angel going back and forth between the sick room of Nellie and the sick room of Mr. Linton, her father Edgar. But Nellie points out that she didn't realize that, they both go to bed early, and in the evening, Cathy's time was unattended. And so she would come in with like bright cheeks, and she's sort of, the implication is that she came in after having ridden across the moors. So we'll find out if that is indeed what happened. We'll find out in these two chapters, chapters 24 and 25 of Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. Chapter 24. At the close of 3 weeks, I was able to quit my chamber and move about the house. And on the first occasion of my sitting up in the evening, I asked Catherine to read to me because my eyes were weak. We were in the library, the master having gone to bed. She consented, rather unwillingly, I fancied, and imagining my sort of books did not suit her, I bid her please herself in the choice of what she perused. She selected one of her own favorites and got forward steadily about an hour. Then came frequent questions. "Ellen, are not you tired? Hadn't you better lie down now? You'll be sick, keeping up so long, Ellen." "No, no, dear, I'm not tired," I returned continually. Perceiving me immovable, she essayed another method of showing her disrelish for her occupation. It changed to yawning and stretching and, "Ellen, I'm tired." "Give over then and talk," I answered. That was worse. She fretted and sighed and looked at her watch till 8, and finally went to her room, completely overdone with sleep, judging by her peevish, heavy look and the constant rubbing she inflicted on her eyes. The following night she seemed more impatient still, and on the 3rd, from recovering my company, she complained of a headache and left me. I thought her conduct odd, and having remained alone a long while, I resolved on going and inquiring whether she were better, and asking her to come and lie on the sofa instead of upstairs in the dark. No Catherine could I discover upstairs, and none below. The servants affirmed they had not seen her. I listened at Mr. Edgar's door. All was silence. I returned to her apartment, extinguished my candle, and seated myself in the window. The moon shone bright. A sprinkling of snow covered the ground, and I reflected that she might, possibly, have taken it into her head to walk about the garden for refreshment. I did detect a figure creeping along the inner fence of the park, but it was not my young mistress. On its emerging into the light, I recognized one of the grooms. He stood a considerable period, viewing the carriage road through the grounds, then started off at a brisk pace, as if he had detected something, and reappeared presently, leading Mrs. Pony. And there she was, just dismounted and walking by its side. The man took his charge stealthily across the grass towards the stable. Cathy entered by the casement window of her drawing room and glided noiselessly up to where I awaited her. She put the door gently to, slipped off her snowy shoes, untied her hat, and was proceeding, unconscious of my espionage, to lay aside her mantle when I suddenly rose and revealed myself. The surprise petrified her an instant. She uttered an inarticulate exclamation and stood fixed. "My dear Miss Catherine," I began, too vividly impressed by her recent kindness to break into a scold, "where have you been riding out at this hour? And why should you try to deceive me by telling a tale? Where have you been? Speak." "To the bottom of the park," she stammered. "I didn't tell a tale." "And nowhere else?" I demanded. "No," was the muttered reply. "Oh, Catherine," I cried sorrowfully, "you know you have been doing wrong, or you wouldn't be driven to uttering an untruth to me. That does grieve me. I'd rather be 3 months ill than hear you frame a deliberate lie." She sprang forward and, bursting into tears, threw her arms round my neck. "Well, Ellen, I'm so afraid of you being angry," she said. "Promise not to be angry, and you shall know the very truth. I hate to hide it." We sat down in the window seat. I assured her I would not scold, whatever her secret might be, and I guessed it, of course. So she commenced. "I've been to Wuthering Heights, Ellen, and I've never missed going a day since you fell ill, except thrice before, and twice after you left your room. I gave Michael books and pictures to prepare Minnie every evening and to put her back in the stable. You mustn't scold him either, mind. I was at the Heights by 6:30 and generally stayed till 8:30 and then galloped home. It was not to amuse myself that I went. I was often wretched all the time. Now and then I was happy, once in a week perhaps. At first I expected there would be sad work persuading you to let me keep my word to Linton, for I had engaged to call again next day when we quitted him. But as you stayed upstairs on the morrow, I escaped that trouble, and while Michael was refastening the lock of the park door in the afternoon, I got possession of the key and told him how my cousin wished me to visit him because he was sick and couldn't come to the Grange, and how Papa would object to my going, and then I negotiated with him about the pony. He is fond of reading, and he thinks of leaving soon to get married, so he offered, if I would lend him books out of the library, to do what I wished. But I preferred giving him my own, and that satisfied him better. On my second visit, Linton seemed in lively spirits, and Zillah, that is their housekeeper, made us a clean room and a good fire, and told us that, as Joseph was out at a prayer meeting and Hareton Earnshaw was off with his dogs, robbing our woods of pheasants, as I heard afterwards, we might do what we liked. She brought me some warm wine and gingerbread, and appeared exceedingly good-natured, and Linton sat in the armchair, and I in the little rocking chair on the hearthstone, and we laughed and talked so merrily, and found so much to say. We planned where we would go and what we would do in summer. I needn't repeat that, because you would call it silly. One time, however, we were near quarreling. He said the pleasantest manner of spending a hot July day was lying from morning till evening on a bank of heath in the middle of the moors, with the bees humming dreamily about among the bloom, and the larks singing high up overhead, and the blue sky and bright sun shining steadily and cloudlessly. That was his most perfect idea of heaven's happiness. Mine was rocking in a rustling green tree, with the west wind blowing and bright white clouds flitting rapidly above, and not only larks, but throstles and blackbirds and linnets and cuckoos pouring out music on every side, and the moors, seen at a distance, broken into cool, dusky dells, but close by great swells of long grass undulating in waves to the breeze, and woods and sounding water, and the whole world awake and wild with joy. He wanted all to lie in an ecstasy of peace. I wanted all to sparkle and dance in a glorious jubilee. I said his heaven would be only half alive, and he said mine will be drunk. I said I should fall asleep in his, and he said he could not breathe in mine, and began to grow very snappish. At last we agreed to try both as soon as the right weather came, and then we kissed each other and were friends. After sitting still an hour, I looked at the great room with its smooth, uncarpeted floor, and thought how nice it would be to play in if we removed the table. And I asked Linton to call Zillah in to help us, and we'd have a game at blind man's buff. She should try to catch us. You used to, you know, Ellen. He wouldn't. There was no pleasure in it, he said. But he consented to play at ball with me. We found two in a cupboard among a heap of old toys, tops and hoops, battledores and shuttlecocks. One was marked C and the other H. I wished to have the C because that stood for Catherine, and the H might be for Heathcliff, his name. But the brand came out of H, and Linton didn't like it. I beat him constantly, and he got cross again, and coughed, and returned to his chair. That night, though, he easily recovered his good humor. He was charmed with 2 or 3 pretty songs. Your songs, Ellen, and when I was obliged to go, he begged and entreated me to come the following evening, and I promised. Minnie and I went flying home as light as air, and I dreamt of Wuthering Heights and my sweet darling cousin till morning. On the morrow I was sad, partly because you were poorly, and partly that I wished my father knew and approved of my excursions. But it was beautiful moonlight after tea, and as I rode on, the gloom cleared. I shall have another happy evening, I thought to myself, and what delights me more, my pretty Linton will. I trotted up their garden and was turning round to the back when that fellow Earnshaw met me, took my bridle, and bid me go in by the front entrance. He patted Minnie's neck and said she was a bonny beast, and appeared as if he wanted me to speak to him. I only told him to leave my horse alone, or else it would kick him. He answered in his vulgar accent, "It wouldn't do Mitch hurt if it did," and surveyed its legs with a smile. I was half inclined to make it try. However, he moved off to open the door, and as he raised the latch, he looked up to the inscription above and said, with a stupid mixture of awkwardness and elation, "Miss Catherine, I can read yon now." "Wonderful," I exclaimed. "Pray let us hear you. You are grown clever." He spelt and drawled over by syllables the name Hareton Earnshaw. "And the figures?" I cried encouragingly, perceiving that he came to a dead halt. "I cannot tell them yet," he answered. "Oh, you dunce," I said, laughing heartily at his failure. The fool stared, with a grin hovering about his lips and a scowl gathering over his eyes, as if uncertain whether he might not join in my mirth, whether it were not pleasant familiarity, or what it really was, contempt. I settled his doubts by suddenly retrieving my gravity and desiring him to walk away, for I came to see Linton, not him. He reddened. I saw that by the moonlight, dropped his hand from the latch, and skulked off, a picture of mortified vanity. He imagined himself to be as accomplished as Linton, I suppose, because he could spell his own name, and was marvelously discomfited that I didn't think the same. "Stop, Miss Catherine, dear," I interrupted. "I shall not scold, but I don't like your conduct there. If you had remembered that Hareton was your cousin as much as Master Heathcliff, you would have felt how improper it was to behave in that way. At least it was praiseworthy ambition for him to desire to be as accomplished as Linton, and probably he did not learn merely to show off. You had made him ashamed of his ignorance before, I have no doubt, and he wished to remedy it and please you. To sneer at his imperfect attempt was very bad breeding. Had you been brought up in his circumstances, would you be less rude? He was as quick and as intelligent a child as ever you were, and I'm hurt that he should be despised now, because that base Heathcliff has treated him so unjustly." "Well, Ellen, you won't cry about it, will you?" she exclaimed, surprised at my earnestness. "But wait, you shall hear if he conned his ABC to please me, and if it were worthwhile being civil to the brute." I entered. Linton was lying on the settle, and half got up to welcome me. "I'm ill tonight, Catherine, love," he said, "and you must have all the talk, and let me listen. Come and sit by me. I was sure you wouldn't break your word, and I'll make you promise again before you go." I knew now that I mustn't tease him, as he was ill, and I spoke softly and put no questions and avoided irritating him in any way. I had brought some of my nicest books for him. He asked me to read a little of one, and I was about to comply, when Earnshaw burst the door open, having gathered venom with reflection. He advanced direct to us, seized Linton by the arm, and swung him off the seat. "Get to thy own room," he said in a voice almost inarticulate with passion, and his face looked swelled and furious. "Take her there if she comes to see thee. Thou shalln't keep me out of this. Begone with ye both. He swore at us and left Linton no time to answer, nearly throwing him into the kitchen, and he clenched his fist as I followed, seemingly longing to knock me down. I was afraid for a moment, and I let one volume fall. He kicked it after me and shut us out. I heard a malignant, crackly laugh by the fire, and turning, beheld that odious Joseph standing rubbing his bony hands and quivering. We're sure he'd sarve yet. He's a grand lad. He's getting to right trait spirit in him. He knows, he knows, as weel as I do, who should be meister yonder. Ech. He mad ye skift properly. Ech. Where must we go? I said to my cousin, disregarding the old wretch's mockery. Linton was white and trembling. He was not pretty then, Ellen. Oh no, he looked frightful, for his thin face and large eyes were wrought into an expression of frantic, powerless fury. He grasped the handle of the door and shook it. It was fastened inside. If you don't let me in, I'll kill you. If you don't let me in, I'll kill you, he rather shrieked than said. Devil, I'll kill you, I'll kill you. Joseph uttered his croaking laugh again. Thar, that's to father, he cried. That's father. We've allus summat t'other side in us. Never heed Hareton, lad. Dunnot be afeard. He cannot get at thee. I took hold of Linton's hands and tried to pull him away, but he shrieked so shockingly that I dared not proceed. At last his cries were choked by a dreadful fit of coughing. Blood gushed from his mouth and he fell on the ground. I ran into the yard, sick with terror, and called for Zillah as loud as I could. She soon heard me. She was milking the cows in a shed behind the barn, and hurrying from her work, she inquired what there was to do. I hadn't breath to explain. Dragging her in, I looked about for Linton. Earnshaw had come out to examine the mischief he had caused, and he was then conveying the poor thing upstairs. Zillah and I ascended after him, but he stopped me at the top of the steps and said I shouldn't go in. I must go home. I exclaimed that he had killed Linton, and I would enter. Joseph locked the door and declared I should do no sich stuff, and asked me whether I were bound to be as mad as him. I stood crying till the housekeeper reappeared. She affirmed that he would be better in a bit, but he couldn't do with that shrieking and din, and she told me and nearly carried me into the house. And she took me and nearly carried me into the house. Ellen, I was ready to tear my hair off my head. I sobbed and wept so that my eyes were almost blind. And the ruffian you have such sympathy with stood opposite, presuming every now and then to bid me wisht, and denying that it was his fault. And finally, frightened by my assertions that I would tell Papa and that he should be put in prison and hanged, he commenced blubbering himself and hurried out to hide his cowardly agitation. Still, I was not rid of him. When at length they compelled me to depart and I had got some 100 yards off the premises, he suddenly issued from the shadow of the roadside and checked Minnie and took hold of me. Miss Catherine, I'm ill grieved, he began, but it's rather too bad. I gave him a cut with my whip, thinking perhaps he would murder me. He let go, thundering one of his horrid curses, and I galloped home more than half out of my senses. I didn't bid you good night that evening, and I didn't go to Wuthering Heights the next. I wished to exceedingly, but I was strangely excited and dreaded to hear that Linton was dead sometimes, and sometimes shuddered at the thought of encountering Hareton. On the third day I took courage. At least I couldn't bear longer suspense, and stole off once more. I went at 5 o'clock and walked, fancying I might manage to creep into the house and up to Linton's room unobserved. However, the dogs gave notice of my approach. Zillah received me, and saying the lad was mending nicely, showed me into a small, tidy, carpeted apartment, where, to my inexpressible joy, I beheld Linton laid on a little sofa, reading one of my books. But he would neither speak to me nor look at me through a whole hour, Ellen. He has such an unhappy temper. And what quite confounded me, when he did open his mouth, it was to utter the falsehood that I had occasioned the uproar, and Hareton was not to blame. Unable to reply, except passionately, I got up and walked from the room. He sent after me a faint, "Catherine." He did not reckon on being answered so, but I wouldn't turn back, and the morrow was the second day on which I stayed at home, nearly determined to visit him no more. But it was so miserable going to bed and getting up and never hearing anything about him that my resolution melted into air before it was properly formed. It had appeared wrong to take the journey once. Now it seemed wrong to refrain. Michael came to ask if he must saddle Minnie. I said yes, and considered myself doing a duty as she bore me over the hills. I was forced to pass the front windows to get to the court. It was no use trying to conceal my presence. "Young master is in the house," said Zillah as she saw me making for the parlor. I went in. Earnshaw was there also, but he quitted the room directly. Linton sat in the great armchair half asleep, waking up to the fire. I began in a serious tone, partly meaning it to be true. "As you don't like me, Linton, and as you think I come on purpose to hurt you, and pretend that I do so every time, this is our last meeting. Let us say goodbye, and tell Mr. Heathcliff that you have no wish to see me, and that he mustn't invent any more falsehoods on the subject." "Sit down and take your hat off, Catherine," he answered. "You are so much happier than I am. You ought to be better. Papa talks enough of my defects and shows enough scorn of me to make it natural I should doubt myself. I doubt whether I am not altogether as worthless as he calls me frequently. And then I feel so cross and bitter. I hate everybody. I am worthless and bad in temper and bad in spirit almost always. And if you choose, you may say goodbye. You'll get rid of an annoyance. Only, Catherine, do me this justice. Believe that if I might be as sweet and as kind and as good as you are, I would be, as willingly and more so than as happy and as healthy. And believe that your kindness has made me love you deeper than if I deserved your love. And though I couldn't and cannot help showing my nature to you, I regret it and repent it, and shall regret and repent it till I die." I felt he spoke the truth, and I felt I must forgive him, and though he should quarrel the next moment, I must forgive him again. We were reconciled, but we cried, both of us, the whole time I stayed. Not entirely for sorrow, yet I was sorry Linton had that distorted nature. He'll never let his friends be at ease, and he'll never be at ease himself. I have always gone to his little parlor since that night, because his father returned the day after. About 3 times, I think, we have been merry and hopeful, as we were the first evening. The rest of my visits were dreary and troubled, now with his selfishness and spite, and now with his sufferings. But I've learned to endure the former with nearly as much resentment as the latter. Nearly as little resentment as the latter. Mr. Heathcliff purposely avoids me. I have hardly seen him at all. Last Sunday, indeed, coming earlier than usual, I heard him abusing poor Linton cruelly for his conduct of the night before. I can't tell how he knew of it unless he listened. Linton had certainly behaved provokingly. However, it was the business of nobody but me, and I interrupted Mr. Heathcliff's lecture by entering and telling him so. He burst into a laugh and went away, saying he was glad I took that view of the matter. Since then, I've told Linton he must whisper his bitter things. Now, Ellen, you have heard all, and I can't be prevented from going to Wuthering Heights, except by inflicting misery on 2 people, whereas if you'll only not tell Papa, my going need disturb the tranquillity of none. You'll not tell, will you? It will be very heartless if you do. I'll make up my mind on that point by tomorrow, Miss Catherine, I replied. It requires some study, and so I'll leave you to your rest and go think it over. I thought it over aloud, in my master's presence, walking straight from her room to his and relating the whole story, with the exception of her conversations with her cousin and any mention of Hareton. Mr. Linton was alarmed and distressed more than he would acknowledge to me. In the morning, Catherine learned my betrayal of her confidence, and she learned also that her secret visits were to end. In vain she wept and writhed against the interdict and implored her father to have pity on Linton. All she got to comfort her was a promise that he would write and give him leave to come to the Grange when he pleased, but explaining that he must no longer expect to see Catherine at Wuthering Heights. Perhaps, had he been aware of his nephew's disposition and state of health, he would have seen fit to withhold even that slight consolation. And now chapter 25. These things happened last winter, sir, said Mrs. Dean, hardly more than a year ago. Last winter I did not think, at another 12 months' end, I should be amusing a stranger to the family with relating them. Yet who knows how long you'll be a stranger? You're too young to rest always contented, living by yourself, and I some way fancy no one could see Catherine Linton and not love her. You smile, but why do you look so lively and interested when I talk about her? And why have you asked me to hang her picture over your fireplace? And why— Stop, my good friend, I cried. It may be very possible that I should love her, but would she love me? I doubt it too much to venture my tranquility by running into temptation. And then, my home is not here. I'm of the busy world, and to its arms I must return. Go on. Was Catherine obedient to her father's commands? She was, continued the housekeeper. Her affection for him was still the chief sentiment in her heart, and he spoke without anger. He spoke in the deep tenderness of one about to leave his treasure amid perils and foes, where his remembered words would be the only aid that he could bequeath to guide her. He said to me, a few days afterwards, I wish my nephew would write, Ellen, or call. Tell me sincerely what you think of him. Is he changed for the better, or is there a prospect of improvement as he grows a man? He's very delicate, sir, I replied, and scarcely likely to reach manhood. But this I can say, he does not resemble his father, and if Miss Catherine had the misfortune to marry him, he would not be beyond her control, unless she were extremely and foolishly indulgent. However, master, you'll have plenty of time to get acquainted with him and see whether he would suit her. It wants 4 years and more to his being of age. Edgar sighed, and walking to the window, looked out towards Gimmerton Kirk. It was a misty afternoon, but the February sun shone dimly, and we could just distinguish the 2 fir trees in the yard in the sparely scattered gravestones. I've prayed often, he half soliloquized, for the approach of what is coming, and now I begin to shrink and fear it. I thought the memory of the hour I came down that glen a bridegroom would be less sweet than the anticipation that I was soon, in a few months, or possibly weeks, to be carried up and laid in its lonely hollow. Ellen, I've been very happy with my little Cathy. Through winter nights and summer days, she was a living hope at my side, but I've been as happy musing by myself among those stones under that old church, lying through the long June evenings on the green mound of her mother's grave, and wishing, yearning for the time when I might lie beneath it. What can I do for Cathy? How must I quit her? I'd not care one moment for Linton being Heathcliff's son, nor for his taking her from me, if he could console her for my loss. I'd not care that Heathcliff gained his ends and triumphed in robbing me of my last blessing. But should Linton be unworthy, only a feeble tool to his father? I cannot abandon her to him, and hard though it be to crush her buoyant spirit, I must persevere in making her sad while I live and leaving her solitary when I die. Darling, I'd rather resign her to God and lay her in the earth before me. Resign her to God, as it is, sir, I answered, and if we should lose you, which may he forbid, under his providence, I'll stand her friend and counselor to the last. Miss Catherine is a good girl. I don't fear that she will go wilfully wrong, and people who do their duty are always finally rewarded. Spring advanced, yet my master gathered no real strength, though he resumed his walks in the grounds with his daughter. To her inexperienced notions, this itself was a sign of convalescence, and then his cheek was often flushed and his eyes were bright. She felt sure of his recovering. On her 17th birthday, he did not visit the churchyard. It was raining, and I observed, "You'll surely not go out tonight, sir?" He answered, "No, I'll defer it this year, a little longer." He wrote again to Linton, expressing his great desire to see him, and, had the invalid been presentable, I've no doubt his father would have permitted him to come. As it was, being instructed, he returned an answer, intimating that Mr. Heathcliff objected to his calling at the Grange, but his uncle's kind remembrance delighted him, and he hoped to meet him sometimes in his rambles, and personally to petition that his cousin and he might not remain long so utterly divided. That part of the letter was simple and probably his own. Heathcliff knew he could plead eloquently enough for Catherine's company then. "I do not ask," he said, "that she may visit here, but am I never to see her because my father forbids me to go to her home, and you forbid her to come to mine? Do now and then ride with her towards the Heights, and let us exchange a few words in your presence. We have done nothing to deserve this separation, and you are not angry with me. You have no reason to dislike me, you allow yourself. Dear uncle, send me a kind note tomorrow, and leave to join you anywhere you please, except at Thrushcross Grange. I believe an interview would convince you that my father's character is not mine. He affirms I am more your nephew than his son, and though I have faults which render me unworthy of Catherine, she has excused them, and for her sake you should also. You inquire after my health. It is better, but while I remain cut off from all hope and doomed to solitude or the society of those who never did and never will like me, how can I be cheerful and well?" Edgar, though he felt for the boy, could not consent to grant his request, because he could not accompany Catherine. He said in summer, perhaps, they might meet. Meantime, he wished him to continue writing at intervals, and engaged to give him what advice and comfort he was able by letter, being well aware of his hard position in his family. Linton complied, and had he been unrestrained, would probably have spoiled all by filling his epistles with complaints and lamentations. But his father kept a sharp watch over him, and of course insisted on every line that my master sent being shown. So, instead of penning his peculiar personal sufferings and distresses, the themes constantly uppermost in his thoughts, he harped on the cruel obligation of being held asunder from his friend and love, and gently intimated that Mr. Linton must allow an interview soon, or he should fear he was purposely deceiving him with empty promises. Cathy was a powerful ally at home, and between them they at length persuaded my master to acquiesce in their having a ride or a walk together about once a week, under my guardianship and on the moors nearest the Grange. For June found him still declining, and though he had set aside, yearly, a portion of his income from my young lady's fortune, he had a natural desire that she might retain, or at least return in a short time to, the house of her ancestors, and he considered her only prospect of doing that was by a union with his heir. He had no idea that the latter was failing almost as fast as himself, nor had anyone, I believe. No doctor visited the Heights, and no one saw Master Heathcliff to make report of his condition among us. I, for my part, began to fancy my forebodings were false, and that he must be actually rallying when he mentioned riding and walking on the moors, and seemed so earnest in pursuing his object. I could not picture a father treating a dying child as tyrannically and wickedly as I afterwards learnt Heathcliff had treated him, to compel this apparent eagerness. His efforts redoubling the more imminently, his avaricious and unfeeling plans were threatened with defeat by death. Ooh. That concludes today's reading of Wuthering Heights. We are getting closer to finding out how Cathy and young Linton Heathcliff end up together. We'll find out what happens next. Thank you very much for joining me. I will see you tomorrow. And again, if you would like to RSVP still to attend that tea party on Friday for the Count of Monte Cristo, we'd love to see you there. Thank you very much, friends. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day.